Merci à vous tous d'être là. Je m'appelle Luc Legardeur, je suis le patron de WeScale, pour ceux qui ne me connaissent pas. Voilà, sujet clos. Je suis accompagné ce matin de Luca Galante, qui est l'un des gros contributeurs de la communauté Platform Engineering, qui est venu nous faire un peu l'état des lieux de l'adoption de ce nouveau paradigme dans le monde. C'est intéressant de partager son expérience, et Pablo aussi qui fera un petit focus technologique. On a 1 heure à peu près, après on fera un petit networking d'1 demi-heure avant que vous puissiez vaquer à vos occupations respectives. Le format petit-déj c'est bien parce que ça permet de ne pas manger toute la journée. On vous enverra par mail, pour vous remercier de votre présence, une place à la PlatformCon en octobre 2016, donc vous pourrez y venir. Et bien entendu, on vous invite à enregistrer vos collaborateurs, parce qu'on va aujourd'hui annoncer l'ouverture de la billetterie et des CFP. On a déjà 300 personnes inscrites, donc je pense que ça sera un bel événement pour octobre. Alors Lucas, ça sera en anglais. Please speak a little bit slowly.
Yes.
Et Pablo, ça sera en français. Voilà. Merci de votre attention et puis bonne matinée. Go ahead.
Does it work? Can you hear me fine? Yeah? Okay, cool. Bonjour. Welcome, everybody. Thank you, Luke. Thank you, WeScale, for the opportunity to speak. It's been very fun last couple of 24 hours here with everybody. And what I want to talk about today is where are we with platform engineering, right? You know, some of you are working with it, some of you have heard about it. So, you know, what's the current state that I see in the industry, in the market, and I think where are we going from here, and ultimately how can your organizations, your engineering organizations benefit from this, right? Essentially what I do is speak to a lot of people. I talk to a lot of engineering organizations, platform teams, and really try and figure out, okay, what does best practice look like in the industry today, and how can it be distilled into frameworks, into templates that everybody can use, right? And you know, we run this very large community, like Luc was saying, PlatformCon, that we're going to host here in Paris. So a few things, but really that's what the talk today is about, is understanding why should you even care about platform engineering, right? And where does platform engineering come from, what it is, where it's going, right? And really, how can you benefit from it? Like, what can it do for you? And then I have added some challenges and opportunities that I prepped specifically for this talk, because I think is some of the latest patterns that I've seen across organizations that try to implement platform engineering initiatives that I think are very, very interesting. And then of course, then we're gonna have Q&A or networking or whatever it is. So these are some of the numbers from our community, which really show you the progressive compounding year over year, right? I think like actually a really good proxy is the number of PlatformCon talk submitted. You know, we started this event in 2022. We had 100 talks submitted. This year we just closed the CFP. This is our CFP. We're gonna open the French CFP today or tomorrow. But you can see, right, there's like over 1,000 talks. And I think what's not captured here is actually the quality. Right? It's not just about quantity, but really the quality, the maturity of the space has been compounding like crazy year over year and across a bunch of other metrics too. But it's not just about the community, it's also about you know, more established players, more established analysts. If you look at, for example, Gartner, I've been speaking with Gartner analysts for you know, years. And I was very happy when in 22, for the first time, they added platform engineering to their software engineering hype cycle. And you can see it's at the bottom here. Then you look at 23 and it's already basically on top of the hype cycle. And then what do you know, next thing in 24, they actually have their own hype cycle, right? Where you can see internally developed platforms, internally developed portals, a bunch of other things there. And not only this, but actually infrastructure platform engineering, which is really a subset, a sub-discipline of platform engineering, already has been added to 7 different hype cycles across SRE, infra platforms, a bunch of other things, right? So not just platform engineering is really taking over the market, the industry, but also, you know, subsets of it already. And we can get into what infrastructure platform engineering is later if you're curious. But it's and I'll mention it in a couple of other slides too. Ultimately, you know, I've been speaking with the ecosystem players like Google, Gartner, ThoughtWorks, WeScale, experts on the field, right, that see what's happening, and everybody basically agrees that in the last couple of years, if it wasn't for AI, platform engineering would probably be the #1 trend in enterprise software, right? So of course it's very hard to compete with AI right now, but we'll settle for #2. And you know, Gartner has added it to their strategic sort of trends to watch. They actually made this prediction, I think like in 22 or 23, which is by 2026, 80% of enterprise organizations will have some sort of platform engineering initiative in place. It's interesting because normally predictions go terribly wrong. I think if you look at this, it's probably tracking really, really well. You know, it's hard to tell, of course, but you know, and of course I have some selection bias in the people that I talk to, but virtually every enterprise that I talk to is at least looking at this, right? Some people have very advanced platform engineering setups, some not, but everybody's thinking about it the same way that essentially everybody's thinking about AI, right? And then, you know, we were just talking, like, what's the intersection of AI and platform engineering? That's also something that I think is very interesting that we can get into later if you guys are interested. Okay, so why are we even here talking about platform engineering, right? Like, why does it matter? The reason is that DevOps has a problem, right? We went, you know, if you look back like 20, 30 years ago, the way software was developed, right? You had this like, you know, throwing over the fence to a poor sysadmin that had to figure out, okay, how do I deploy this thing while I'm actually maintaining all the networking of my servers, right, in the basement? And of course, you know, you had an essential misalignment of incentives between application developers and sysadministrators, like they were called at the time, ops people. And so this gentleman here, Werner Vogels, when they launched AWS back, I think in 2006, said, hey, you know, the point here is that you should build it and you should run it, right? And shift everything left to the developer, which at the time, you know, seemed like a good idea. I think in theory, it's a good idea. The practice, though, is a bit different. And especially if you look at the last, you know, 20 years since it happened, there are, I think, two things that have changed drastically. One is the size of engineer organizations, right? I mean, I think Amazon itself at the time had like 200 or 300 developers when they launched, right? They probably have 20,000 right now, so that's 100x. You know, and then you have a lot of other companies, right, that didn't have developers, like McDonald's, Ford, right, that now have huge engineer organizations, right? So, you know, software is eating the world is one thing, and the other is, of course, that starting with AWS and then the other cloud providers, right? You have this explosion of cloud native tooling, right? Of course, if for those of you that are familiar with CNCF, which is not the French train provider, but it's the Cloud Native Computing Foundation landscape, you know, it's basically become a running joke, right? In the market where it's like, okay, I don't even, like it's impossible to navigate. I don't even know where to start, right? So those two things have drastically changed how you can actually do DevOps at scale. The point is you can't really. And the first people to realize this, you know, the first companies were the leading tech organization, leading engineering orgs like Google, Airbnb, Spotify, and so on, that they were the first ones to say, look, I'm literally onboarding hundreds of developers a month in some cases. I can't expect my latest hire, my young front-end engineer to be familiar with this increasingly complex setup that I'm building, that I'm running on. Like, it just doesn't work. I need to build some sort of platform layer in between developers and operations, between developers and the underlying infrastructure stack, right? And so that's really where platform engineering started, and it's been trickling down to mainstream and everyone else ever since, right? And so if we double click on the problems, right? There is this, I think, very interesting slide that actually comes from Daniel Bryant at his first talk at PlatformCon 22, where he's mapping, right, the tech, the tools that developers are using across the last 20 years, as well as how their responsibilities and the role have evolved, and like what app architecture they're sitting on, what infrastructure they're using, and so on, right? And you can see the integral of the pink curve, right, which is representing the cognitive load, right? And of course, it exploded in the last 10, 15 years Because now developers are completely overwhelmed by just the sheer amount of stuff that they need to deal with, right, on a day-to-day basis. And that's what we call cognitive load, cognitive overload, right? The point is they're just stuck, right? And they're stuck waiting for their ops colleagues, right? Like it's just creating a ticket, hey, can you help me do that? And just send it over to the ops colleagues. And then of course affects productivity. And frankly, it creates a ton of friction in between these two stakeholder groups, right? It's not great to work that way. And so of course, on the flip side of that, you have operations team that now are, stuck, basically become this like organizational bottleneck, right, for the entire company, because they need to field this inbound requests all the time. They need to put off all the fires. And they just end up doing this like very manual, very repetitive work, right? You need to stand up the nth Postgres database for the nth time, and it's just like, it's really boring work, but you have to do it. And of course, that means you have a huge lack of standardization and automation and a bunch of other things that will look more into it. And so in this context, platform engineering is really this discipline that takes all the tech and tools that are floating around in your enterprise organization and binds them together into golden paths that enable developer self-service, that abstract the underlying complexity of your stack from developers, right? And the sum of those golden paths is the end product of a platform engineering initiative, right? And product is a keyword here that we're going to explore more. But it's an internal developer platform, or IDP, which is really, again, the sum of these golden paths, and is really focused on shielding developers from the underlying complexity while still giving them the right level of context for them to do their job, right? And that's really this platform as a product thing that we're going to explore a little bit more today. And then, of course, at the same time, it drives standardization, it drives governance, it drives security, it drives compliance by design across all your workflows, all your development teams, right? That's what platform engineering and IDPs are in a nutshell, right? So if you're wondering what it looks like, one thing that I think has really helped the compounding of the quality and the maturity that I was talking about earlier is standards, right? We're very big on standards and blueprints in the platform engineering community. Here you can see a reference architecture for multi-cloud on AWS and GCP. You can swap in and out things very easily, but that's just to give you an idea. You have 5 planes, and I think it's very important to understand that building a platform is just like building any other application, right? You have a backend, you have a front end. You usually want to start from a backend, right? And so that will be your integration and delivery plane. You have a developer control plane, which is your front end. Then you have observability and monitoring, security, and then your infrastructure that you're sitting on. Now, this is actually almost 24 months old at this point. We are gonna release new reference architectures with slightly different changes because I think it's a space that is moving very, very fast, and so you have to keep up. And I think these standards need to continuously evolve. But that is really how most people in the industry, in the community right now, are thinking about these things, right? I've added here a few examples. A few of you asked me, what are examples, like case studies, right, of actual platforms? If you go on platformengineering.org/platform tooling, you find a sort of like a collection of these. We're adding actually a lot more now, but this is very interesting. These are all PlatformCon 24 talks. So it's important to mention we released the first reference architecture at PlatformCon 23. That was the first time that anybody saw them. And about over 20% of practitioners the year later at PlatformCon 24 actually use them to walk through their platform setups and explain it to other colleagues, right? So really they have become a standard and something that we spend a lot of time on. We looked at platform engineering, we looked into internal platforms. Ultimately, what can it do for you? And I think another helpful model, mental model, beyond the reference architecture has been kind of like this value pyramid, right? Of really, how do we explain to different stakeholders and how do we think about what our platform engineering needs to hit to deliver value internally? And so I want to spend some time on exploring this. And so if you start with kind of like usually what's the first goal for a lot of organizations, right? It's like, well, we need to improve developer experience, right? Or developer productivity. And so we're looking at this part of the pyramid here, and as we said, right, like the main challenges from a developer perspective is I'm just stuck waiting, right? I'm stuck waiting, plus I'm afraid of screwing things up because I don't want to, you know, touch something that ends up having, you know, security breaches, security issues down the line. I am just in general just like overwhelmed. And one thing that's very interesting that also happens a lot of times is what we call shadow operations, right? This is where developers, you know, development teams basically rely on their more senior colleagues to help them with ultimately operations tasks, right? Because they're stuck. And so instead of waiting for the central ops team, it's like, hey, can you just do this for me? And what that ends up creating is a very unproductive situation from an organizational perspective, right? Because you have your most priced resources, right? Your more senior developers actually doing operations work and not developing code, right? And so what platform engineering can do for developers, and this is, you know, we're going to spend a little bit more time later on like stakeholder management and how to sell your platform engineering initiative internally. But ultimately, you know, it's very important that as we go through these personas, you think about, okay, how do I present the platform to them, right? Because this is really what it's about when you think about platform engineering is organizational transformation where you need to take everyone on the journey with you. Otherwise, you're going to fail, right? And so if we think about developers, of course, the point is, you know, you enable developer self-service, so they no longer have to wait 2 weeks, right? They can just like click a button, run a command, regardless of what the interface is, and get what they want, and they can move on, right? Obviously, that improves the experience, productivity, and the interesting thing is, from an enterprise perspective, they do that while staying in the guardrails that you've designed for them, right? That's ultimately what we mean by golden path is move faster without breaking things, right? To change the Facebook thing. Okay, but on the flip side of that, of course, you also want to make sure that you're able to, you know, increase ops efficiency, drive standardization, drive automation, right? And so when we're looking at this part of the pyramid, right? The issue from an infra standpoint, right, is that you have this huge lack of standardization, right? If I have to fight this ticket ops constantly, and I need to do all these things manually every time, of course, by definition, there's no standardization, right? It's just like a bunch of scripts that communicate. It's just the spaghetti configuration code, basically, all over the place, right? I'm, you know, basically under just constant pressure, I become this bottleneck, right? And I'm just treated as a cost center, which is another huge issue, right? And so for them, what platform engineering is, what the internal developer platform is for infrastructure people is really, you know, the way I think about it is this vending machine layer, effectively, that lets you provide your infrastructure services, your infrastructure products, right, as, you know, a prepackaged thing where you don't have to worry about, you know, how it's consumed. You need to worry about how it's provisioned. Everything is taken care of by the platform, and you can actually focus on solving interesting problems and not provision the same database for the, you know, for the 10th time. And ultimately, both of those things, you know, play into, you know, kind of like the higher part of the pyramid, which is really where executives sit, right? And executives have, of course, like a bunch of different pain points. It really depends. You know, what the latest sort of the priority du jour is. If it's like, okay, well, I need to improve my top line, I need to improve my bottom line, I need to improve developer retention or employee retention broadly. You know, I don't want to be the latest CIO that gets famous because of a security breach, right? It depends really like what you wanna focus on, costs, of course, right? And platform engineering ultimately helps with all of those things, right? The point of a platform engineering initiative really, again, is that you move faster without breaking things, so you cut time to market, you can grow revenue faster, right? While really having a much better overview, cost control, and really just like, you know, awareness of what's going on across your engineering organization. This is actually a study that we did together with Forrester, an analyst, where we asked, you know, what impact are you experiencing, you know, improving developer experience and effectively, you know, implementing a platform engineering initiative. And you can see, you know, we'll share the slides later, but there's some interesting insights in there as well. And so if you think about how you calculate ROI for your platform engineering initiative, right? I think the key thing here is to talk about metrics, right? And it's something that it really gets forgotten, I think, in most initiatives, where people just get really excited about like, okay, platform engineering, it's awesome, I want to get started, let's go. But the problem is, if you don't if you don't start measuring a very solid baseline, right, then it becomes very, very hard for you to actually show what's the value of your platform engineering initiative. And I see, it seems obvious, but you know, the vast majority of platform engineering initiatives that I see don't do that, right? They literally just, you know, start and then like go back like 6 months later, 12 months later, and it's like, hey, look, we built this amazing platform, isn't it great? And it's like, well, compared to what? Right? How is that improving something? And so that's where, you know, and this is a bit of a beast, so we don't have to get into all the details, but like the point is, I think we should have, when we talk about ROI, we really should have a conversation about metrics, right? And I think, you know, there is an over-reliance in the industry on, you know, established metrics, like, you know, if you're familiar with DORA, if you're familiar with SPACE, right? And obviously, you know, they're industry standards for very good reasons. They are great at some things, but I think they're not great at telling you the value of your platform engineering initiative, right? Because they're really sort of designed to be quantitative, to work at scale. They're not designed to tell you, okay, how have we improved in the last 2 weeks on very specific things, right? And so, you know, we have come up, this is like ROI calculations that we do on the platform engineering initiatives that we implement. But we've come up with a bunch of things like autonomy scores, you know, what's your service creation time, what's your onboarding time for developers. And a few of these are more quantitative, a few are more qualitative. I think the key here is like really, you have to talk to the different stakeholders when you get started, right? It's really about figuring out, hey, you know, Tom is spending 40% of their time just, you know, provisioning stuff for people, right? Like just fielding ticket ops, right? While Amy is, you know, waiting 2 weeks on average, right? Like, and really pinning down, okay, well, this is the problem that we're going to solve now in this like first iteration of our platform engineering initiative. You go out, you fix that, right? You go back and you can go back within 4 weeks and say, hey, look, now you have, you know, Amy is now spending, you know, 5 minutes waiting for a Postgres database, and Tom now has like, you know, 30% of their day back to do things, right? Like that's really how you get that initial momentum, right? And you can go back to the different stakeholders and sell to them the value of the platform and then go from there, right? So we're going to explore this a little bit more, but in general, if we recap this, right? As I said, we have developers that are really struggling with this, like, you know, cognitive load. They're just stuck waiting. The flip side of that is infrastructure people become the bottleneck of the entire company, and there's all this manual stuff that ends up in cost and insecure configurations. And the way to think about, okay, what is the value that we want to create on both of those ends from a platform engineering perspective is automation on the one hand and standardization on the other. Don't worry about the DevX infrastructure platform engineers. We'll get into that later. But that ultimately then plays into, okay, cutting time to market, moving faster without breaking things, right? And really operating at a high performance while you know, retaining the kind of like the highest enterprise grade standards in terms of security, governance, and so on, right? Okay, so now I want to spend a little bit of time on what I see right now as the key challenges in the industries, and I think where the opportunities are really for everybody, right? Both from an end user perspective, from a consultant perspective, from a vendor perspective. And the first one is this, right? The first one is basically executives going like, okay, platform engineering is fantastic. I'm bought in. I just listened to Luca blabbering for the last 25 minutes. Let's go. And so they basically just take the existing, you know, hodgepodge of DevOps, SRE, Cloud Ops, infrastructure people, and just rebrand them to platform people, right? And it's like, we're doing platform engineering. And that's actually what happens in the vast majority of enterprises, right? Because of course, you not only have a brownfield legacy infrastructure setup, you also have a legacy organization setup, right? You give people. And the reality is that these people continue doing the same thing, right? You know, you change their title, but at the end of the day, they continue fighting ticket ops. And a lot of times they use the excuse of platforms to leverage shiny new tech and solve their problems, not the developer problems, right? And the underlying issue there is that they're not looking at their platform as a product, right? And that's really one of the key differences and one of the key things that has to be done in upskilling your workforce going into platform engineering is going from, this DevOps mentality of, hey, it's a one and done 6 months infrastructure project, right? To, well, no, actually I'm building a product that has a 6 months life cycle, right? Or sorry, a year life cycle, right? Like usually 5 years plus. And so really this idea of like ownership, right? It's not like a project-based thing, but it's really a product that I'm shipping to the market, and really thinking about effectively the total addressable market for my product is the size of the engineering organization, right? That's really what we mean with this. And so what that entails is that developers are your customers. And this is something that, seems obvious, I think, for some of us, but for a lot of people, it's not, right? They really think of their relationship with developers in this like very paternalistic way of like, hey, I'm teaching them to use infrastructure, not enabling them to self-serve infrastructure without me, right? And that's really what the platform is about, right? And of course, the interesting thing is once you start looking at your platform as a product, you unlock all the means of the ideas around platform, around product management, right? Like we have 20, 30 years of product management best practice, from user research, right, to product roadmap, building the feedback loops. Of course, product marketing, because again, you're going to market internally with this product, right? All of those things become accessible if you, shift your mindset towards that way, right? And so just to double click on this for a second, because I think we're good on time. Platform as a product, the first definition actually comes from this very famous like Martin Fowler article back in 2017 or 2018 that actually we are working with ThoughtWorks to update now, funnily enough. But really this idea that your platform team effectively is a startup, right? That builds this product to go to market internally. And the moment you understand, right, that the developer as your customers is when you're really starting to solve these problems, right? And I'm not going to go into all of these things, but these are some of the things that I've seen are very interesting, and that really are the features of the top performing platform teams, right? I think, and I'll just cover like a couple of them. One that's very, very important for me is the first one, is do not reinvent the wheel, right? We were talking with some of you yesterday about this idea of like the problem with platform engineering is that it's new, right? And so there is this bias, inherent bias of essentially saying, okay, you need, like if I were to tell you like, okay, I have containers, can you orchestrate containers for me? You would say, okay, well, let's implement Kubernetes, right? You wouldn't go and build Kubernetes because Kubernetes is already this like industry standard, right? That everybody acknowledges. The problem is we don't really have such established standards by definition in the platform engineering space because it's so young. And so as engineers, we have this bias to just like, oh, I'm just going to build it on my own, right? But the problem is that's not where the value is from a platform engineering perspective. I really believe that from a platform team standpoint, your value creation is what I call the last mile optimization, right? It's really taking this toolbox that's out there, both open source and commercial tooling, and repackaging into something that works for you, right? And that works for your organization. Really focus on that last mile tweaking, not on rebuilding everything from scratch, because you're gonna end up competing with vendors, open source tools, and 2 years later, you're behind the entire industry and you haven't achieved anything, right? They just told me I have 5 minutes, so that's the only one that I'm gonna explain. So the other thing is this idea that a lot of organizations think of platform engineering as a technological problem. And it's not, right? I've never seen a single platform engineering initiative fail because of a tech stack issue, like not once. They fail because people are not able to drive this cultural change across these different stakeholder groups, right? And that's how we can think about sort of like, okay, you have a platform engineering team. And again, a platform engineering team can be like 5 people, it can be 200 people, right? So these are not necessarily titles, but it's mostly just the functions and the kind of like the bases that you need to cover from a platform engineering perspective, right? You need to have, people that are thinking, okay, how do I sell this to infrastructure teams, right? The infra platform engineers, that's what that is. And we've seen, it's actually like a, a sub-trend that's already going pretty fast. Because I think we do have historically an over-reliance and over-indexing on, okay, well, ultimately the end user of the platforms are developers, so how do I just make developer experience great and not really worry about, okay, but what's in it for infrastructure teams? The problem is if your infrastructure teams are not on board, they're going to block it and your platform initiative is not going to go anywhere, right? So, and this is true for all of these people, right? The point is you need to do this very complex stakeholder management, right? This is where, the head of platform, the platform product manager, and frankly, experts like WeScale, like ourselves, can help like managing this transition, right? And drive that transformation across all the different stakeholder groups, right? Last one, I think it's very interesting to see, and I think this is true of most org transformations. You have, they're like champion, they're too champion reliant, right? And the reality is that in enterprises, even what success looks like is, okay, you now have like a 20-30% adoption on your platform across the engineering organization. Then that person gets promoted, moves on to a new job, and that's where you get stuck. And you don't grow from there, right? And the difference is the top performers have full executive buy-in, right? This is where I think executives play an essential role in the success in a full-scale adoption of the platform, because ultimately there is an important top-down component here that cannot be underplayed, right? And so I really think what I see still, the vast majority of platform initiatives, and frankly I think the vast majority of org transformations in the enterprise get stuck somewhere in the middle, right? Just because they can't, change culture all the way to executives and make this a multi-year priority for the company, regardless of their role, right? And that's it. I think one thing that sort of like Luke and I have been chatting about yesterday is really this idea of like, okay, how do you get everybody on the same page? I think, when you're thinking about this like rebranding issue, right? How do you really take the existing team that you have right now or a new team that you're hiring and you really make sure that you set a clear mission, a clear vision for everybody to go in the same direction, right? How do you upskill everybody from an educational standpoint, right? And ultimately after that, how do you drive continuous improvement, right? On a monthly, on a yearly basis, right? That's one thing that we're gonna spend a lot of time on. So, happy to chat more about it. But until then, thank you.
Hello, thanks for the presentation. I'm Galem, a product manager for Kubernetes at Scaleway. You mentioned treating internal platforms as products. And not all organizations, product management is a skill, and not all organizations will have that skill. So my question is, for deciders, should they considering also like buying like platform engineering, enabling products rather than making everything internally if they don't feel like they should internalize all the skills necessary to build an internal platform?
That's a great question. I guess, can you? Yes. I actually skipped this slide because otherwise we were getting too long. But I think that's a great point. And it's really this shortage of PM talent. I think too many people, and again, I was having a conversation about this yesterday, I think it's very interesting. Too many companies over-rely on this idea of like, hey, I need this like unicorn figure that is this like technical product manager that is able to spar technically on infrastructure topics with people that have 20 years experience on DevOps and infra stuff. But at the same time, that has the communication skills to take the developers, the infra people, the executives, the architects, the security teams on board, right? Very, very hard to do that. Very hard to find that person also because in a lot of enterprises, frankly, the best product people are put on external products, not on internal products, right? So you have a lot of challenges that add to this shortage, which is why I think if you think about 80-20 or 20-80, I think a lot of organizations think of this the wrong way around, where it's like, oh, if only I get a product person in, I solved all my problems. That's not what happens. I think you make things better. But you're much better off, I think, upskilling everybody, right? Like really raising all boats, right? And it's not, if you think about what's the what's the change really is this mindset shift towards product, right? And it's something that I've seen you can really work with a couple of weeks of like trainings and you know, and workshops and so on with people. That's why the last slide, right? We're focusing a lot on this in the industry because I think that's really one of the opportunities here for everybody, right? Of thinking, okay, how do I make this the right way? And it's really about like just retraining people and raising all boats. That's how I think about it. Then of course, if you can have like an amazing product person on top, great. But it's really about like, how do I take the existing people that know the stack, that know my developers, and just train them to think about product first.
Ok, bonjour à tous. Je m'appelle Pablo Lopez, je suis un des CTO de WeScale avec Stéphane qui est quelque part au fond, voilà. Et on va faire rapidement pour l'introduction parce qu'on a beaucoup de boulot. Donc je me suis pas concerté avec Luca, mais voilà, j'ai pris la version du landscape technologique du CNCF. Et donc on va y aller tranquille. Non, un peu plus sérieusement. Donc ça, c'est vraiment le landscape tel qu'il est aujourd'hui, avec une foule de technologies assez incroyable. Et donc, toujours sans me concerter, on a réduit ça à la partie platformengineering.org. Et vous voyez que, ne serait-ce que sur cette page d'accueil, il y a déjà, je ne sais pas, une cinquantaine de technologies, une centaine de technologies. Et finalement, rentrer dans toutes ces évolutions technologiques, c'est pas quelque chose qu'on va pouvoir faire simplement. Par contre, ce que j'ai essayé, c'est de faire une forme de curation et de se dire, il y a des choses qui sont stables, qui sont établies, qui sont dans vos entreprises depuis très longtemps. Il y a des choses qui sont en cours de certification, et puis il y a des choses qui sont un peu plus émergentes, qui viennent avec justement l'émergence du platform engineering. Les valeurs stables, en principe, si vous êtes dans cette pièce, vous devriez tous en avoir un petit goût quelque part dans votre SI. Et du coup, j'ai utilisé ce landscape, cette représentation qui en effet prend très bien, marche très bien, avec un certain nombre de planes. Et puis au final, là-haut, dans le développeur control plane, on a des choses qui sont très classiques, qui ne bougent plus beaucoup finalement. Que ce soit les IDE, on n'a pas de grandes révolutions, que ce soit le contrôle de version, tout le monde a un Git, quel que soit son goût, si c'est du GitLab, du GitHub, du Gitty, c'est un peu toujours la même chose. Les outils d'infra as code ont pris leur place, on commence à avoir tout ça. Pareil, la CI, vous avez probablement tous une CI. Et puis, il ne faut pas écouter les développeurs cowboy qui vous disent que Jenkins c'est pourri. Non, on fait des choses très bien avec Jenkins. C'est pas la peine de toujours tout jeter pour aller vers le nouvel outil shiny, comme disait Lucas. Vous avez des registries d'images et puis l'observabilité, que vous l'ayez fait à la main avec des outils open source, que vous utilisez des outils SaaS. Finalement, là aussi, on commence à avoir des choses qui sont assez établies et qui ne bougent plus beaucoup au niveau des normes. Ce qui est plus intéressant, c'est qu'il y a, du coup, avec l'émergence du platform engineering, des valeurs qui sont plutôt à la hausse. Des valeurs qui sont plutôt à la hausse, on va avoir, par exemple, une forte prégnance de cube. On ne dit pas que cube va tout résoudre, c'est ce qu'on disait tout à l'heure. Il y a des gens qui font des choses très bien avec du IaaS, il y a des gens qui font des choses très bien avec de l'assemblage de services SaaS. Par contre, si on me demandait aujourd'hui, je dois démarrer ma plateforme, par quoi je commence ? Je dirais que Cube, ce n'est pas forcément un mauvais choix. On va avoir aussi beaucoup de choses qui vont tourner autour de GitOps et des outils de déploiement continu. Et là aussi, il y a des standards qui sont en train de se mettre en place, des standards de la CNCF, des standards poussés par les cloud providers. C'est émergent, mais on commence à les voir de plus en plus. On commence à retrouver des patterns un peu chez tout le monde, de dire « Ok, je commence à avoir des outils de CD ». Et puis, l'air du temps étant ce qu'il est, on commence à avoir beaucoup de poussées vers le bas, vers le security plane. Parce que pendant un temps, la sécurité, c'était l'affaire des équipes RSSI. Maintenant, c'est en train de devenir la problématique de tout le monde. Donc, on va avoir des outils de coffre-fort de secret. Tous les cloud providers s'en sont équipés en moins de 6 mois. On va avoir des outils de scan de vulnérabilité en continu. Donc on commence vraiment à retrouver ça de manière un peu courante. Et si vous n'êtes pas encore équipé, ça risque d'arriver très très vite. Et puis on en parlait finalement, le platform engineering, c'est une discipline qui est très neuve. Donc il y a des valeurs spéculatives, il y a des planes, il y a des parties de ce landscape qui sont complètement en chantier. Et finalement, si vous adoptez un des outils, c'est un peu un pari. Pourquoi c'est un peu un pari? Parce que on a peu de recul, on est à, je sais pas, 2 ans, 3 ans, 4 ans, mais on voit que finalement, il va y avoir encore du mouvement. Donc il faut être prêt à adopter, peut-être faire marche arrière, peut-être changer, peut-être pivoter, tester plusieurs choses. L'un des grands pans qui est là-haut, c'est on parle beaucoup de self-service dans le platform engineering. Si on parle de self-service, on parle de portail. Et dans la série des portails, il y a quelques acteurs SaaS qui se dégagent. Il y a un acteur open source. Bref, c'est compliqué, ça bouge beaucoup. Il y a des gens qui sont partis il y a quelques années, qui ont fait leur propre portail. Et finalement, que ça colle très bien à leurs besoins. On voit qu'on commence à être là-dedans. De la même façon, Lucas en parlait, toute la partie glue autour de tous ces services, de tous ces planes qu'on appelle parfois un orchestrateur, là on est dans les early stages. En open source, c'est très faible. On commence à avoir des produits commerciaux, Lucas en parlera mieux que moi, comme l'orchestrateur de Humanitech. Bref, on est dans une période où finalement, je ne saurais pas vous conseiller un cheval. Security plane, on continue aussi à beaucoup travailler. On a de la sécurité paramétrique, on a de la sécurité interne, on a de la sécurité au runtime, on a du chaos engineering, on a énormément de choses et ça bouillonne par là. Donc là aussi, si vous choisissez d'adopter un produit, attendez-vous peut-être à le changer dans 2 ans. Et puis le dernier, c'est côté resource plane ici, là. On a de plus en plus du multi-cluster, du multi-cloud. Comment je vais faire pour piloter tout ça, pour piloter toute cette variété? Donc c'est assez difficile de faire un panorama technologique parce que finalement, cette partie-là, peut-être que demain, dans 1 mois, j'aurai encore 5, 6, 10 nouveaux produits à vous présenter. Ce qui est important, c'est de garder en tête finalement ces grandes cases, ces grands services, et parler plus de services que d'outillage. Comment on fait pour s'y retrouver là-dedans? Déjà, vous êtes au bon endroit, c'est pas mal. Il y a une seule solution, c'est la veille. La veille et du coup se reposer sur des gens qui vont vous amener des expériences. Écoutez, allez voir ce qui se passe à la PlatformCon, à Londres, à Paris. Écoutez vos prestats, parce que finalement, ils vont venir vous nourrir d'expériences extérieures. Et puis, on a la chance, nous, d'avoir des espaces d'expérimentation. Et il y a beaucoup d'expérimentation à faire pour trouver quel est le bon outil. Et en fait, je vais conclure en disant, finalement, ça fait 10 minutes que je parle d'outillage, que je parle de service, mais ça, c'est la partie facile. C'est la partie facile. Pourquoi? Parce qu'en fait, ce qu'on disait, si je veux réussir mon initiative de plateforme, je vais commencer par pourquoi. Pourquoi je veux la faire? Quels sont... Lucas en a listé une dizaine. Je pense que Luc et Stéphane, dans leurs livres blancs respectifs, en ont listé une quinzaine. Il y a probablement 30 bonnes raisons de démarrer une initiative de platform engineering. Et finalement, cette question, c'est celle qu'il faut mettre tout en haut. Derrière, on va poser la question du pour qui. On a parlé de développeurs, on a parlé de team infrastructure, on a parlé de beaucoup de choses tout à l'heure. Et puis derrière, comment? Comment? Est-ce que je vais faire ça de manière itérative? Est-ce que je vais faire de la user research? Est-ce que je vais faire des interviews? Est-ce que je vais régler d'abord les pain points les plus prégnants ou est-ce que je vais onboarder les nouvelles équipes? Voilà. Et puis, comment je vais construire mon équipe de platform engineering? C'était le pain point numéro 1 de dire, finalement, je transforme mes DevOps en platform engineer. Pas tout à fait. Je peux peut-être onboarder quelqu'un de la sécurité, je peux peut-être onboarder un dev, je peux peut-être créer une nouvelle équipe. Je ne suis pas obligé de recycler mes ops. Et donc au final, bah, tout ça, c'est quoi? Bah, c'est de la culture produit. On en parlait, voilà, j'ai rien réinventé. Ce qui est l'outillage, les services, c'est facile. Vous trouverez la solution technologique. Il y a peut-être 10 façons de faire, il y a peut-être 20 outils, mais vous trouverez la solution technologique. C'est pas là que vous allez échouer. Par contre, en effet, tout là-haut, le comment je vais le faire, pourquoi je vais le faire et comment je vais le suivre, c'est ça qui risque de vous poser problème. J'ai terminé. Est-ce que vous avez des questions ?